Hi everyone, welcome to the Education Hour. I'm your host Shaleeka Jayalath. Last week we took a sneak peek into the work of Nobel Laureate John Nash. This week we delve further, investigating a very specific aspect of his work, the prisoner's dilemma. Let's have a small recap of the Nash equilibrium. The Nash equilibrium is a method commonly used in economics for analyzing competitive situations in order to understand how rivals shift or maintain strategies and alliances. The Nash equilibrium describes the moment when all parties are pursuing their best case scenario and will not change their strategy even if a competitor changes his or hers. Nash showed that every two-player game has such an equilibrium where neither party wants to change their minds. The prisoner's dilemma is a specific occurrence of the Nash equilibrium where we reach the equilibrium at a cost to both players. In other words, it is not the optimal result. In its original form, the prisoner's dilemma was somewhat along the following lines. Two criminals are prisoners, get arrested and are sent to prison where they are put into separate cells and have no means of talking to each other. The prosecutor, lacking evidence, decides to meet with each prisoner separately and makes each of them a deal. They each have the choice of either blaming the other suspect, known as defecting, or remaining silent, in other words, cooperating with each other. If both cooperate and remain silent, both of them would serve only 1 year in prison. If one party blames the other party while the other party remains silent, the one who defects would walk free while the other would serve 20 years. If both blame each other, they would both serve 5 years. Now, what would the prisoners do if they acted in their own best interests? The first prisoner would think, no matter what the other person does, it is always better for me to defect. If he remains silent, I will be free. If he defects, I will only serve 5 years instead of the 20 years that I would serve if I cooperated. The second prisoner thinks the same. And so, if both act in their own best interests individually and both defect, then they both end up serving 5 years. However, here's the dilemma. If both were to cooperate, both would be better off because then they would only serve 1 year. The result of the prisoner's dilemma, both players defecting, is the Nash equilibrium. But in this instance, the Nash equilibrium, as I said before, comes at a cost for both players, meaning it is not the optimal result. And we can see countless examples of the prisoner's dilemma in real life. Let's say a retailer decides to keep their store open on Sundays because his competitor starts doing so. Both retailers would be better off if they both take a day off on Sundays, but each individually can gain an edge in market share by opening if the other does not. So wanting to get one up on the other, they open up. And of course, when both parties think like that and both open up their stores on Sundays, then neither party gains an advantage. Or let's say a drinks manufacturer drops their beverage prices in order to gain an edge in market share, which then pressurizes their competition into doing the same. If only one party drops their price, they can gain an edge in market share, but when both end up doing so, both lose out. In a prisoner's dilemma scenario, everyone loses. When more than two parties are involved, the prisoner's dilemma turns into what is known as the tragedy of the commons problem. In economics, the tragedy of the commons is a situation in which individuals who have unlimited access to a resource act independently according to their own self-interest and contrary to the common good of all users, cause depletion of the resource. And this problem is all around us. Consider the problem of overfishing. Every fishery would be best off if everyone would just fish enough so as to keep the fish population stable. However, each fishery can gain a tiny edge over their competitors by fishing slightly more than what would be sustainable. But if all fisheries do so, soon the fish population would break down entirely. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the number of overfished stocks globally have tripled in half a century, and today fully 1/3 of the world's fisheries have been pushed beyond their biological limits. The World Wildlife Fund predicts that if cod fisheries continue to be fished at current rates, there will be no cod left by 2022. According to marine biologist Enric Sala, 75% of fisheries are overfished. If nothing changes, all fisheries will have collapsed by 2050. Overfishing is a direct consequence of the fact that the game has a bad Nash equilibrium. Air pollution is another example. Every country would be better off if all countries would limit their carbon emissions. However, each individual country can gain an edge by polluting slightly more than the others. But if every country follows this strategy, we will all be worse off. Uncontrolled human population growth leading to overpopulation, habitat growth and poaching leading to the anticipated sixth mass extinction of bacteria, fungi, plants, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish and invertebrates, mining, drilling and burning of fossil fuel resulting in global warming. These are all examples of the tragedy of the commons issue involving physical resources. There are also such examples involving human health. Take the existing pandemic. Avoiding a vaccine shot and relying on the established herd immunity instead will avoid potential vaccine risks. But if everyone does this, it will diminish herd immunity and put people who cannot receive vaccines for medical reasons at risk. How do we change the game? Let us take the overfishing problem. In Port Lincoln, on Australia's southern coast, the community set a limit on the total number of lobster traps that could be set and then sold licenses for those traps. The only way newcomers could then enter the market was by buying a license from another lobsterman. The licensing has allowed the lobster population to thrive. Game theory helps us identify bad Nash equilibria in problems like overfishing and store opening hours. Inverse game theory, on the other hand, helps us redesign these problems so that the Nash equilibrium represents a better outcome for everyone involved. Lobster trap licensing, minimum mandatory vacation day policies, and regulated store opening hours are all examples of how we can shift the Nash equilibrium. The key is to identify the type of game you are in, and if you are caught up in a prisoner's dilemma or a tragedy of the commons type of game, understand that everyone loses and take a long view when making decisions that will ensure sustainability for everyone's common good. In 2013, Pope Francis spoke of a global issue which was worse than all others, what he called the globalization of indifference, where we each think, it's not my problem, why should I care? But when we all think like that and global issues become no one's problem, then they end up being everyone's problem. Thank you for tuning in. Join me next week on the Education Hour when we consider more global issues and their possible solutions. This is Shaleeka Jayalath. Stay safe.